And so to give you that idea of a theology of marriage, kind of the background from the scripture, what that looks like, we're going to move from that this morning into the idea of some very practical application of that. The idea that when you enter into a relationship, if you get to that place that you're in a relationship with someone that's got a map that obviously will be different than your marriage map, how you begin to bring those two maps together, begin to align those, and then together begin to look at that idea that says, what is God's design for us? What is God's design for relationships, for marriage, and family? So we're going to spend a lot of time trying to think through some practical application of what does it look like to begin into the sense of a relationship that may possibly lead to marriage, and how you begin to think through that. How do you look at that idea of just developing some relationship skills and knowledge that's going to be able to take you forward? One of our main goals, I told Rick, I said, one of the things that we hope to do is to give you this idea of a theology of marriage as a foundation, and then today to take you into some wisdom kinds of thinking that's going to move you forward. But really what we want to do is we want to sell you a book. And it's not our book. It's a friend's book, and it's because we think that it's one of the best things out there for single and married people, but it's for people that are sitting at the stage where you are at the threshold of entering into the next season of what life is in your education, your career, picking a partner, and then moving into life together. We think it's one of the best books that's out there for you to be able to get that. Rhonda's going to introduce it to you in just a couple of minutes. But first, we want to give you that sense of what does it mean and where are we headed as we begin to talk about the idea of wisdom.
So 2 reasons why this is important for us to bring this to Anchor House to you. And that is, we talked about it yesterday, 98% of you will marry in your lifetime. And so this is information of an advanced knowledge of what you should look for in a mate. It's something that's totally lost in our culture as you think about movies that you've seen about relationships. As maybe you've seen your friends already pursue this in a way that isn't successful, or even in the home that you grew up in, you realize, I wonder if this was thought about before. And so the second reason why we're bringing it to you at this point is this. The word for wisdom in Hebrew is hakmah, and it also means the skill of living, applied knowledge. And so this is definitely a skill for living that you will need to know how relationships work, how I work in a relationship. What do I need to look for in another person as I am pursuing or being pursued?
One of the great challenges for any generation is the idea of understanding what does it look like to enter into a relationship that eventually moves towards marriage, towards family, towards living life together. Over the years, that idea has shifted in all kinds of different directions from the place of the arranged marriage. Think for just a minute, if you were living in the time when the arranged marriage was the practice and the pattern of what was going on for relationships, for choosing a mate. Think for just a minute, in your family circle and the friends of your parents, who would they choose for you to be married to? If they were arranging a mate for you, think for just a minute who that might be. And you might be really grateful for the fact that over the last 75 years, 100 years, we've kind of shifted to this idea of courtship into the idea of dating, to the craziness of what it means to select a partner for life now. So we want to think through that a little bit and think through how that has shifted and what the current dating practice, why it really isn't working. I don't know for you, but most of the singles that we know, it's like dating kind of sucks. You know, I mean, if you find a good setting and a good situation, it's like, this is good. But trying to get to the good dating situation, it's like dating kind of sucks. Trying to figure out how to make this all work. Do you go online? How do we make it work? So let's think for just a minute why the current dating practice really isn't working.
And Curt has already aligned one of them for us, and that is that family guidance has shifted from individual choice. And so a lot of people don't even consult their parents. Even the practice of the gentleman asking for the woman's hand in marriage has gone by the wayside in many ways. It's more informing the parents instead of asking for her hand in marriage. And so all of that has kind of shifted. We don't think that's a good plan, nor do we think that, going back to parents choosing for us, but parents give us guidance that some of it is great, some of it we have to filter through, look at Scripture. If your parents aren't believers, all of that wisdom isn't going to be coming from Scripture, so look into that. The other part of it that's been shifting is that singles need guidance, and often we're not in community where that guidance can be given. And so we're relying on just a few people. I'm going to talk about it in a minute, but also we meet online, and then we don't have the accountability of community that says, oh yeah, Curt is that kind of man. I've worked with him for the last 5 years, and I know that is who he is. So that kind of validation of the things that you're looking for in a mate.
What did that look like when we dated or when we met? What and how we developed our relationship?
So Curt and I met at a camp that we worked at, a Christian camp. I was the girls' dean, he was the guys' dean. I was older than him, and he was still...
10 years older than me. You would never
I was not 10 years older, but I was older and out of
10
college.
months. I meant 10 months.
Oh,
Yeah.
thank you for clearing that up. But at that point, we were just friends. We worked together 16-hour days. You know what it's like, living in community like this. And so I was not looking to date Curt, but when you're around somebody that much, you're taking in information about them, aren't you? And I was taking in information about him. I was realizing, wow, he's worked with Connie for the last 5 years with Campus Life, and they have a great friendship. That means he's never infringed on the friendship. I even talked to Connie about him, just like, how long have you known Curt? Oh, 5 years. I love working with Curt. He really validates women in our ministry, and he's given me a lot of opportunities. I'm hearing these things, and so I'm collecting information about him that's being validated in community.
The second shift is the idea from established social norms and objective values to subjective values. The idea when parents and families were choosing a mate, what they would look at is the economics of it. How is this going to make us better either in the community or in the business world, in the church world? How are we going to gain from this? What are the objective values that we will be able to gain? To the place now that the values that are based on so much of dating are very subjective. How good looking are they? How popular are they? Do they make me feel good about me? One of the big shifts that's happened in the last 10 years as couples come to that place of marrying, and the sense is that marriage is getting older and older and older. I mean, if we go back to the early centuries, even to the place in the first century when we look at the Mary and Joseph and the whole Christmas story, Mary and Joseph could have been very, very young. And especially Mary could have been very young as she entered into this marriage with Joseph. Over the years, those kinds of arrangements have been made up until even modern time. And it was the idea that what we would do is we would find somebody who would be and help us develop a foundation for our future. We would get, we would fall in love. We would look at who that person is. We would say we can grow together, and we will figure out how to do our education together. We'll figure out how to do our finances together, gain the money. Eventually, we'll buy a house. Then we will have our family and that kind of thing. Now, instead of a foundation, most couples, before they get married, are looking for a capstone. A capstone is the idea that says individually, and again, you hear that word individual coming up over and over again. The mindset of our culture is radical individualism, not community, not pairing, not connecting. And so couples now look at it and they say, hey, listen, once I get my education done, I get my career started, and I begin to find myself really successful in my career, I get all of my student debt or whatever paid off, I have a house, and I'm financially set to go. Now I'm ready to get married. And so many couples are not getting married until 27, 28 years old or older because they're looking about how do I create a capstone. Marriage is just one more thing to add into my vita, into my resume that says, hey, I'm a qualified person. Instead of saying, I want to enter into this with you, we're going to grow our lives together, and our marriage will be the foundation that allows us to bring that together. It's changed in a big way.
And the third one is the technology, that we're meeting online. And there's no validation of what a person says online until you meet them, and then you're going to be starting to validate some of the things they said. But again, you're not in community. So a person can say anything they want about themselves. Should you believe that? You know, I think it's something that we as Christians, raised in Christian homes, where we're taught to trust people, to be forgiving, to see the good in people, we often fall into this trap of trusting somebody when they haven't earned our trust. And we haven't really weighed that. Are they really reliable? Can I rely on this information? And meeting online, I think one of the positives of meeting online is that you're aligning your values. So you look online, you see the picture. Yes, we do look at a picture of a person and saying, yeah, that I'm interested in that person. But then we look at the values and we say, oh, you know, their values do not match up in any way with mine. So you go past that person. But then you choose somebody online that you think, I have some values that are cohesive with this person. I'm going to look more into that. So that's the positive, is that it allows you not to let the physical get involved in it as much as looking at the values and measuring yourself with those values.
So one of the things that you find in online dating is you take an inventory, and what they'll do is they'll do what community used to do. They'll align you with your likes, dislikes, your values, and bring those things together. So it becomes a challenge to be where you are and stepping into that idea of saying, yeah, we're going to pick a mate for the rest of our lives, but do you pick a mate in the same way that you pick a date? Which becomes an incredibly important question for you to think about. Isn't the idea, one of the old slogans when we were growing up was the idea that every date is a potential mate. People are now dating for a lot more insignificant, superficial reasons. The whole concept of the idea that the first date is not the conversation about, hey, do you have a kiss on the first date? It's like, do you sleep together on the first date? And it's like, and it goes back even before that. It says, you know what? What about the friend with benefits? I mean, you don't even have to have a date. You just sleep with a person and then figure out, boy, where does this go if it goes anywhere, or was it just a one-night stand?
So, do you have a friend who has fallen in love with a jerk? Or a jerkette? Because they come in both varieties. And the book that we want to introduce you to is How to Avoid Falling in Love with a Jerk or a Jerkette. I know it's a crazy title. If you carry it around with you, people are going to ask you about it because it's kind of crazy. But it's a great concept because people are falling in love with jerks because they're out there and they don't have any kind of grid in order to help themselves discern this. Yes, we want to give you that. That's what this plan, the RAM, Relationship Attachment Model, is all about. Attachment is just another word for bonding. It's used a lot in psychological terms. It's the relationship between a mother and a newborn baby. They lay the baby on the mother's chest, and it's a bonding experience. An attachment is happening. It's also what happens in relationships. And we don't want to bond just everywhere. Bonds are important to be discerning with because our hearts are very fragile and special, and God wants us to protect our hearts. And so this is a model that's going to teach us how to protect our hearts, how to form attachments that are healthy and beneficial to our life.
Talk about the days when we were growing up, when we were dating. Back to that idea of, do you have a kiss on a first date? And now the question is, do you go to bed and have sex on the first date? Both of those are bonding experiences. I mean, for us, kissing was just like a fun thing to do, but we didn't realize is that just even kissing has a bonding component to it. That the sense when you kiss another person in a passionate kind of way, a kiss that's 6 to 10 seconds long begins to stimulate hormones in your brain that are the same as the bonding that Rhonda was talking about between the mother and baby when they lay that baby on the mother's breast. There is a bonding that happens. Kissing is fun, but it's not just for fun. There's a bonding element that happens that you need to be aware of. One of the things that you need to stay aware of is that there are jerks out there. How many of you have met a jerk? How many of you have dated a jerk? How many of you have a jerk as a roommate? No, don't go there on that one. There are jerks out there, and the thing that you don't want to do is to marry a jerk. Remember what we just said? If you think about that idea, the people that I date are potential mates. The way that you get involved with a jerk that you find yourself married to is the whole dating thing, and you begin falling in love instead of thinking in love. What does a jerk look like? I mean, how do we discern what a jerk is? Warning signs of a jerk. First, jerks are boundary breakers. I don't know, somebody downstairs was reading the book Boundaries. Anybody heard about that? Or was it?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, maybe you've heard the book Boundaries. The idea that they don't really understand, they don't have any sense of self-awareness or the awareness of others and boundaries around them. The kind of people that are constantly, you're just looking at it and just going, gosh, could they just control themselves? Could they think about somebody other than themselves? That idea of personal awareness is incredibly important. Personal awareness in other people, when you begin to look at that idea of dating and choosing a mate, becomes very, very important in that idea of personal boundaries. Self-awareness. A friend of mine illustrated self-awareness like this. She said that she was talking to a person. She had gone to New York to go to her grandmother's funeral. And she was talking to this person, and she said, and they said, "Where have you been?" She said, "Well, I was in New York for my grandmother's funeral." And the guy goes, "New York? I love New York. New York is my favorite place. I was in New York this last summer. And did you go to Central Park? Did you go to the theater?" You know, I mean, totally missed everything about this woman who had gone to her grandmother's funeral. The whole focus became on him and his association with New York. That is a person who lacks self-awareness, who doesn't have a sense of boundaries. They have also, in that same illustration, a lack of empathy.
Yes.
Empathy is being able to share with someone in what they're going through. The idea that says, your grandmother, oh my gosh, that's got to be really hard. I've never lost a grandparent, so I can't imagine what that was, but how are you doing? What's going on there? Empathy is leading towards that person, caring for them. The third sense of warning sign of a jerk is a lack of emotional control. I mean, they're just all over the place, and their emotions are the most important thing that's happening in the room. And they want you to recognize their emotions because they want you to recognize them. Jerks aren't always narcissists, but often they are, and that is the sense of that focus on them and that sense of lack of emotional control. One important warning to think about is that good-hearted people are the ones that are most at risk. And who are some of the most good-hearted people you know? Disciples of Jesus. People who have been sensitized by the gospel. And so good-hearted people begin to look at these jerks and they begin to say, hey, listen, he did it this time, he won't do it again. He asks for me to forgive him, so I'll forgive him, I'll forgive her. And so the idea is, as a good-hearted person, you begin stepping into the danger zone of the jerks around you.
And often we think, I think I can help this person. I can change this person. I can be the force of change in this person's life. And yes, relationships are mutual. There needs to be a give and take in a relationship. But rescue dating is not what we're to be about. Compassion, Scripture tells us all to be compassionate. Compassion is something that He has directed us to be about. But compassion dating or rescue dating or missionary dating is not. right then, I think probably popped in some people's minds, well, I know somebody, and maybe it's even your parents. And my mother was a Christian, and my dad wasn't, and they got married, and 5 years into it, my dad accepted Christ. Those are good stories, aren't they? They're wonderful stories, but they're not stories to bank your life on. I would say 9 out of 10 of those do not happen that way. And so this is not a prescription for relationship. It is something we need to be aware of. We need to look in the right places and have some guidelines as to what we are willing to accept.
You ever heard the phrase that love is blind? Mm-hmm. Turn to the person next to you. Well, let's just talk as a group. What does that mean, love is blind?
You don't look at the negative part of them.
You don't look, and you often overlook the negative part of a person. What else?
You have tunnel vision.
Tunnel vision, yeah. It's like, I just see what I want to see. Yeah, absolutely.
And you're so emotionally involved, you can't see beyond your emotions.
Yes.
Sometimes it means that you don't see how it's affecting you.
Yes.
You only see that one person.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes.
Love is like a feeling, so you can't base off anything besides your feeling.
Yeah, it's a feeling. I mean, and we have interpreted it that so much in our culture. It's what I feel, not necessarily connected to the commitments that love asks us to make. And so we're caught up in it. Somebody over here? Yeah.
People don't understand love.
That's really good. That's very true.
People don't understand love. So why is it that we consider love as blind? Two things. One, because people lack the head knowledge to think through love as more than just an emotion. And so how do you begin to think through love? What do you need to really know about relationships? What do you need to know about that person before you allow your heart to go in their direction? The friend that wrote this book, How to Avoid Marrying a Jerk, he said, the name of his ministry is Love Thinks. And it is the idea that we don't fall in love, but we think in love. Because love is not an emotion. Love is a commitment. And the emotion flows out of that commitment. And so we need to use our head and to think through that. What do we need to know about a person? We need to know the compatibility potential between us and them. Are we really compatible? And people often ask, well, don't opposites attract? They do. But there's a whole different range about how opposite you are in the relationship that you're entering into. Compatibility potential, relationship skills. Watch that person. How do they relate to other people? How do they relate to you? How do they relate to their parents? How do they relate to strangers? We'll talk a little bit more about that. Patterns in other relationships. Not only dating relationships, but definitely dating relationships. Look and see how they responded to those people. A number of you will marry somebody who has been married before. What was that marriage like? That's incredibly important to think through and talk through. So relationships from the past, family patterns, watch them in their family background, the culture.
I'd like to add something to that because that was a part of our relationship. What tends to happen is that we grow in the home that we have been born into, and we don't have anything to compare it to. And so that is what is normal to us. And we don't even identify anything in that home or that relationship between our parents as being maybe problematic. Maybe you have been self-aware of that, but I wasn't. My dad was a narcissist. I didn't know that. This was my dad, He was a workaholic. He was very remote in our family. He was committed to the marriage. He was committed to providing for us as a family, but he was a narcissist, and I didn't know that. And it was this discovery process as I matured and I got to see other families and how relationships work, and realized that most of the people I dated were narcissists. Why was that? Because I'd been imprinted by, this is the man that I most respected because he was my dad. And it was not a good pattern for a relationship for me to go forward with. So I needed to identify that. And not that I disparage my dad. I love my dad. He's in heaven now. I know he sees the whole thing differently now. But I didn't want to fall into that mistake because I didn't identify that in my own family.
The last is character and conscious traits. We're going to look at all of these again, but the question to ask yourself is one, when I look at other people, what do I need to know about them? This is a beginning list to help you to think through that. We're going to go over that before we end for the day, but also the idea of self-awareness. Are you aware, as Rhonda was just sharing, are you aware about these things about yourself? One of the things that often happens is that we assume that we know these things when we fall in love at the feeling level. Do you know that phrase, assume? Have you heard that saying on that assume makes an ass out of you and me? Ass is a biblical word for a donkey. I'm just making sure you know that. To assume that makes a donkey out of both of you, and that's something that you don't want to do. So people lack the head knowledge of what to look for in a partner. They also lack the heart knowledge about understanding what love is.
Not understanding love that was brought up.
And you might look at that and you might go, oh, I think you kind of got screwed up here with your, that's not the heart, that's the brain. The truth is, our brain is the emotion center of our lives. When you fall in love, when you look at that person and you go, this is somebody that I could really have a relationship with, I mean, you have that sense of infatuation. You have the sense of passion. That's your brain. The amazing thing is that God created us that way to allow us. Remember we talked yesterday about Adam and Eve in the garden? We talked about the fact that Adam and Eve entered into this relationship, that it begins with passion, leads to intimacy, and you have to go through the route of vulnerability and commitment. Adam and Eve were at that place that they just kind of naturally were drawn to each other. No, who else was it? But for us, we've got to have those inhibitions lowered for us. So God's created in our brain that when we fall in love, our brain is saturated with peptide cocktail that are the hormones that makes your brain feel the same way that it does on cocaine. When you fall in love, your brain becomes drunk in love. You stop thinking and you start feeling. And your body is surging with all of these feelings. So what the idea is that it lowers your inhibitions so you do and say things and practice things that you wouldn't if you were thinking through it. I mean, when you fall in love, when you're saturated and drunk in love, I mean, you'll stay up late hours into the night when you know you should be preparing for a test the next day or you've got to go to work. You'll go to Costco at 12 o'clock at night to get something just because you're in love. You know, I mean, sunsets are more beautiful. Music is more melodious. It changes the way that you are. But that is not the central place. That is the beginning point. But we need to move back to that idea of what does it mean to think in love and to think through what it is that God has for us.
And so
how do we do that?
with this RAM program, this model, yes. Okay. Intimacy of knowing. So the first element of starting a relationship is knowing the person. And how do you know a person? The intimacy of knowing is talking, being together, so it has a need to actually be physically together, and also time. We have a rule of a 3-month rule. You don't take the relationship to another level for 3 months. 3 months is how long it takes to see patterns in somebody's life. And if you're online, if this is a relationship that's long distance, you're going to need more time because you're not in person. You're not having the opportunity of testing what you're hearing with community or in person. So a 90-day prohibition period, a time that reveals patterns, provides an opportunity to observe the person in various situations. Meeting your family is an important one, or contacts, allowing the safety to move deeper to the more committed areas of relationship building.
So you need that time because you're looking for patterns. When you just assume that you know this because you've seen it happen once, you don't know the person. You're looking for patterns. patterns are what help you to understand that. One of the things that's really interesting when you go to the Old Testament, you look at Proverbs, and you get all the literature about wisdoms, about wise men and fools, and the simple-minded individual. It is the idea that says, no, it's not just that individual act, but it is the pattern that goes over and over and over again. You're looking for those patterns. One of the most common ways that people are set to get involved with a jerk is by accelerating the pace of the relationship. You step into it too quickly. Does that mean, as Rhonda said, that if you know somebody that met, married, and it all happened in that 90-day period, and they've been married for 50 years, that's the exception. We're talking about the rules that we need to keep in mind.
We do a lot of premarital counseling, but we also do pre-engagement counseling, which is a great way to even look at some of these things before you're very far down the road. But also we do crisis counseling for couples. And these are the kinds of things we hear. If only I knew now what I know, if I knew then what I knew now, I would be so much better off. I saw this indication in my mate's life, and I just ignored it. I thought I was so much in love, I could make a difference, and it would just go away. These are all myths that are absolutely not true. And we are so desperate to let you know them so that you don't make this mistake. Too emotionally involved to actually be discerning. So we like this RAM program because it's relationship attachment model. The first element of a relationship is knowing, then trusting, then relying, then committing, then intimacy. This is a sequence that actually is missing in our culture. As you can see in the movies, in things that you're reading, in your friends' relationships, you're being pressed into this mold that the culture says is how a relationship grows. And it's absolutely false. So in this model, knowing should always be ahead of all of the others. So let's say you're at the 90-day period, and this is how much you know that person. You shouldn't trust them more than that. You shouldn't rely on them if you can't trust them. You shouldn't commit to them if you can't rely, trust, and if the knowledge is just at this level. Everything should follow your knowledge of the person, and you definitely should not be intimate with the person that you can't commit to, you can't rely on, you don't trust, and you don't know very well. Does that make sense?
The rule of safe zone for relationships is never allow one level to exceed the previous levels. That you know them, you build trust, you rely on them, then you can commit to them. And so we begin to think through that. So it's incredibly important to do that. So we're going to walk you through this RAM model here. Beginning with the idea of knowledge. In fact, we're going to spend more time on knowledge because what we want to do is just kind of whet your appetite to go out and buy the book. Not to sell the book, but because we really believe that you need the information in the book. So the idea of knowledge is what we've been talking about. Gathering knowledge, paying attention, observing while you're dating, observing them as they interact with other people, and observing them as they respond to situations, observing everything about them, not just watching. There's a story about a medical school, and in this medical school, one of the instructors of the medical school was working on this idea. One of the really important things about being a great physician is to observe and to know what's really going on. So he wanted to be sure that all these medical students had that well understood as they were training. He comes into class one day and he has a beaker and he says, ladies and gentlemen, this beaker, I have 8 ounces of urine. And he says, I want you to observe what I'm doing, and I want you to understand the importance of observation. As he takes his finger and he dips it into the beaker and he puts it into his mouth. And he says, ladies and gentlemen, what I'd like you to do is I want to find out how well you do with observation. And so he took the beaker and he handed it to this student here, and he said, I want you to do what you just saw me do. Yeah, exactly what you guys are looking at me like right now. They're looking at this professor and they're just going, what? Oh, this is crazy. So the beaker goes around the room. every student, I mean, this guy can feel them out of medical school. Every student takes their finger, they dip it into the beaker here, and they put it in their mouth. The beaker goes all the way across, all the way back, all the way across, back to the staff. Professor walks back and takes the beaker. He says, I want to be sure that you understand the importance of observation, not just seeing, not just watching, but observation. Had you been observing and not just watching, you would have seen that I dipped this finger into the beaker and I put this finger in my mouth. I want you to do what I do, what you observe. So as you learn to know the people that you are in relationship with, do not just watch them. Observe them. Look clearly. Look for interpretations of what is going on. That is what we're talking about when we talk about truly learning to know someone.
And ask questions. And as you find things that are concerning to you, ask the question. You need to have an open relationship to be able to ask. We often in our culture have a hypersensitivity about hurting people's feelings. You can ask questions in a way that doesn't hurt somebody's feelings. It's just asking for more information. And you need to develop that kind of relationship with somebody, that it's safe to ask questions. So, the first one. Yes?
You're going to tell us about trust, or am I doing that?
Oh, you said you were going to do that.
That's not going to fight here. Your question is, at that trust level, is this person worthy of my trust? Where has this been demonstrated? What are the patterns of trust that I have seen? Do they do what they say they're going to do? Are they honest with people around them? Are they honest with themselves? Begin to look at that. The idea, the old parable, or the old proverb that says, no one tests the water with both feet, 1 foot at a time. Trust. Test it. See if it's worthy. See if you can trust them. Look at that idea and recognize that idea that so often we think, okay, they made a mistake and I forgave them. Well, forgiveness and trust is different. Forgiveness is this unconditional thing that we have learned from who and how God forgives us. And so the idea of trust is letting go. I'm not going to hold them at that place of accountable to pay back what they have done and to release them from the desire to pay back. Trust, on the other hand, is a confidence in their integrity. This says I can trust that they will be who they say they are.
It's something that they have earned. And I don't think we often understand that. We forgive, but it needs to be verified. After we forgive, the behavior needs to change. And that's how we know that it's actually something that they're sorry about, that they actually do not want to be a part of their life. And so they need to earn our trust. Trust is different than forgiveness.
And so the reliance comes out of the trust. Reliance is the pattern of seeing trust repeated over and over again. That they have been faithful. What a great word that is. That they have been faithful to fulfill what they have said that they would do. That they are good stewards of the things that they have. That you can rely on them to borrow your car. Borrow your heart. Borrow your emotions. Can you rely on them for those things? And then finally, the next one is the idea of commitment, and that is the act of choosing. That says, I will choose because I trust you. I see that I can rely on you. I can commit to you to this degree. Does that commitment say that you're going to marry them? No. It just says, maybe the idea that just says, hey, listen, can we be in a dating relationship? We used to call it going steady. But, now it's just hanging out or something. And what every one of those steps into commitment needs to begin at the knowledge, trust, reliance, then the next step. And begin to move further and further until finally we get to the idea of intimacy. Intimacy is a deep surrender. What a great word, surrender. This says, I can trust you so much, I can surrender my heart to you. I can surrender my body to you. I can surrender the deepest feelings of my heart to you because I have walked through this pattern and I have seen that you are worthy of my love.
So the safety zone, again, is nothing exceeds your knowledge of the person. And as this grows, trust can grow if it's earned. And if they are trustworthy, then you can move reliance up. Each one should follow the other. Commitment. And this is, of course, the last. So, let's look at some patterns that might be
Take a look
something
at this
that you
now.
have experienced.
So look at this here. So here's a relationship. This person feels like they know the individual that they're in relationship with. Trust is not going to exceed that, but they're beginning to lean into it, and they're trusting them. They have seen patterns, they're relying on them, but they're unwilling to commit. Who is this person?
A jerk.
Has the potential
Yes.
of being a jerk. What's the problem? What's going on in this person's heart?
Fear of abandonment.
Fear of abandonment? Excellent.
Yes.
Yeah. Or the idea of the fact that they are, the risk is that they are commitment adverse. This is my story. In our relationship, and I can't tell you why. I had a great family growing up. My parents were married for 65 years. All of those things, but I was commitment adverse. It took me forever. I mean, Rhonda would lay her heart out. We got to know each other really, really well. We worked together. We saw each other's standards. We were friends in a really powerful way. We trusted each other. We depended on each other because we saw those patterns. And Rhonda came to me and she said, hey, yeah, this was the end of our first summer. She said, let's go to at the end of our first summer, she said, hey, I hope we can stay in touch. And I just kind of played it as a joke. And I said, boy, are you asking me out? Because I didn't want to deal with that idea of abandonment. I didn't want to deal with that idea of the risk that it would take for me to make it some kind of commitment. But then we did. We began spending time together away from camp. Next year came around for camp to start again, and Rhonda said, hey, I just got to let you know, we're going to work together. I just want you to know that my heart's really going your direction. And I said, I can't do it. I'm not going to tell you the whole story because you'll think I'm a jerk. But there was a sense for me that I was commitment adverse.
But you were not in touch with that. And so it was a process of community, actually. People coming around him that knew him and knew us and actually talked you off the ledge, right?
Yeah. What about this one here? Look at this. So a low level of knowledge, lower still trust, lower sense of relying on each other. There is very little commitment, and yet they're off the chart on touch and intimacy. What's happening here?
One night stand.
One night stand. Yeah. And so this is basically a lot of what we're seeing: intimacy without commitment. And you guys are being pressed on that because the culture and media making it seem like that is the norm. Not even the norm, but that is the healthy way to do it. And you're missing out if you don't go in this direction. And this will all come. This will all come. The truth of the matter is, once you get here, you're substituting sex and touch and emotion for dealing with the things of getting to know each other, learning to trust each other and rely on each other.
So when a premarital couple comes and this is their profile here, and they're sleeping together, we ask them to stop sleeping together because all of these other intimacies in their relationship are not growing because they're going straight to this. And that's filling their whole viewfinder, but it's not filling their hearts or filling their life with something good for the future. They're not building a marriage.
Even a married couple that comes to us, and we find out that they've got all kinds of conflict and problems going on, and they go, but our sex life is really great. So you know what? I'm glad to hear that. But what you need to do is you need to hold back on your sex life right now because you're going to sex to find a sense of soothing and security that your heart is yearning for, and knowing, trusting, relying, and being committed to each other becomes so very, very important. How about this one? So, kind of a medium stage of knowledge. They're trusting here, and they're here, but way up here is the commitment. Who is this? What was that? Somebody who's really needy.
Codependent,
Yeah,
yes.
they're
Overly dependent.
They're a security seeker. They're looking at that place. Make me feel better about me and about our relationship. Let me know that I'm safe. Therefore, I'm going to be committed to you. Whatever you want, I'm in. And so it begins to go that direction. One last one. How about this here?
This is also the,
Needy,
You know?
like dependent.
it is a dependent person,
Yeah.
yes,
Very
both,
dependent.
yeah.
Years ago, it said, in fact, that whoever is reading the Boundaries book, this is the word codependent. It's just saying, listen, boy, I don't even know if I can trust you, but I need you so badly. I'm just going to hang in there with what's going on. And so it's the idea of codependence.
So we're going to take just knowledge and kind of break
No,
that down.
Actually, we're going to break for some questions, and
Okay.
then we'll come back to that.
All right.
We're giving you a lot of information. And again, we're trying to sell a friend's book, not because he needs the money, but because you need the material. It's called How to Avoid Falling in Love with a Jerk. There's a lot of other material out there. There's a lot of other books that you can get. But more than anything, what we want is for you to think through this material. One of the best ways to think through it is in the conversations that you'll be having. Questions before we take up the 10 minutes and something else? Yes.
When you're talking about like online dating and like not knowing how the people like react on a daily basis, how does that change when it comes to like video calls?
Like what?
When it comes to video calls.
Video calls,
Yeah, like
Oh.
yes.
Yeah, again, I mean, we have seen, I would guess that when we do premarital counseling, 20 to 30% of the couples that we do premarital counseling for begin, they met at the idea of online dating. They did the inventory, they did the phone call, they did the video call, and then they began getting together. So the idea of stopping at just the inventory, the online video call, I mean, you need to see them in community. Can it happen without that? Yes, it can. But the risks go up higher and higher. The less time you see them in context, in their community, and you begin to look for those patterns. Because again, you're not seeing them in the normal part of life.
Yeah.
And they're not seeing you in that as well.
The normal part of life is an important part of it too, because a person puts their best person forward. You know, on a weekend, I'm going to see my girlfriend for the weekend. I put my best person forward and I'm up, but maybe that person's depressed all week and you don't see that. You don't see what, depths they fall into when they're not with you because they're so excited about being with you, but this is a character problem that they have. So being with them in real life is super important. And like how we met or how you could meet in a setting of community is a great way to do that, because one of the things I noticed about Curt was his work ethic. And if you're just dating somebody that you never see them at work, you don't know how they pick up tasks. You don't know how they handle authority over them. You don't know how they delegate authority. You don't know how they respect personal space. And all of those things are important to know about somebody. So community opportunities, need to be sought before you make a commitment to another person.
Questions? Yes?
Oh, sorry. I was just gonna ask about, since this is supposed to be cohesive, like all of you are cohesive with each other, where would you place spiritual?
Yes.
Sexuality and growing with someone on a spiritual level?
Yeah. So again, the idea is, let's be really clear, the spiritual life is a holistic life. All of this is spiritual. So all of this needs, there needs to be that injection of what does it mean to be a follower of Jesus? What does it mean to be obedient to Jesus? Fits into every one of these categories. What do you know about that? And in your knowledge of that, what impact is that having on the way that you're living life as being a trustworthy, faithful, kind person just in relationships? What does it look like in all of these others? So the idea that says, okay, what's your Bible study look like? Are you in accountability? Are you in a discipleship relationship? All of those kinds of things become part of this knowledge thing, and then you're looking for the pattern. So excellent question. Yes.
And that's our next point. Yes.
So when the knowledge gets high, and then the trust, and reliability, and commitment, how do you not let the intimacy get high as well? If it's before marriage.
Yep. That's hard.
So one
But
of
you
the-
have some good rules for yourself that you don't transgress. Absolutely don't transgress. You don't make rules while you're in the middle of kissing somebody, or when you're in a place that you could be compromised. You have these rules. You keep the rules because you want to protect your relationship. One of the intimacies that we guarded against is praying together, because it is an intimacy to pray together. And so we'd be on a staff together, and we would definitely pray in the staff setting together. But until we had figured this part out, we didn't pray just the two of us together. And that, I think, was a protection that actually helped me in the situation where Curt was not ready to commit, and it protected my heart from going further into the intimacy of our spiritual life together. And we shared spiritual things together, but we didn't actually have those intimate prayer times together. Does that make any sense?
So again, the rules thing, but it's back to this idea of keeping the structure in mind. And that's the idea that love is not just, you don't fall in love, you think in love. It's not your emotions, it's the idea of saying, okay, what does this look like relationally? And these ideas of building relationship. The quick, same thing we were saying, the quick fix, the quick attachment is intimacy. But do you want the quick or do you want the growth? You know, and so I mean, it's a decision, and it's a decision that's really hard for us to step into in the culture that we're getting. It's like the frog in the kettle. You put the frog in the kettle and you turn the fire on, and the frog's going, oh, this is kind of cool. This is kind of like a jacuzzi until finally the frogs boil, and that's exactly what's happening around us in the culture. I mean, we do not know. I mean, this is not talked about very many places because the culture has just set itself against that and gotten to the place that said, and so it's hard to determine those kinds of things. And so that's why it's really important to think through and set this idea that says these are the standards, these are the things that we want to do.
So you brought this up, is it Tyler or Taylor? Taylor brought this up spiritually, our spiritual lives, our spiritual compatibility. So the first one we think of is believer, not believer. And so I hope on all of your scales it needs to be a believer. But you have experienced life enough to know there are various degrees of understanding believing in Christ and walking with Him. And that is something you need to discern about the person. Is it, oh yeah, I grew up in church. Yeah, my parents are Christians. I'm headed to Bible school, but you don't see anything in the life that says I'm walking with Jesus. The second thing would be kingdom and ministry oriented. So we went to seminary right after we got married, and I was so surprised in seminary how many of the wives said, oh, well, being a pastor is his job. It doesn't really affect me. And it was just startling. And so many of them didn't participate in the ministry. It was a shift because before that it was, you needed to play the piano and sing in the choir and, teach Sunday school and do everything. But this was a big shift of, that's his thing and I'm not really involved in ministry. Big danger. We saw many, many couples break up because they were not equally yoked in ministry or kingdom-minded. And so that's something you need to check out too. Is this person desiring to live a life in which the gospel is being portrayed in their life, in their actions, in their finances? Are they all in, or is it just, a Sunday Christian?
Now, we could put a big umbrella over that, right, the word discipleship on that, and that would be a significant part of it.
And lastly, it would be the theological foundation. Are they making decisions based on their gut? Oh, I just feel like this is what we should do. Or are they thinking through it theologically? Do they have a foundation that actually gives them a foundation to stand on, and it's not a whim, whatever the culture is saying or whoever is speaking into their life? They need to know what the Word says. The Word is our foundation. The Holy Spirit in our life is our foundation. And that needs to be, you need to be equally yoked in that.
We'll take one more question, but then we'll be around. You got another question?
So I just want to ask you one more thing about the RAM model that you have. Obviously, a really big part of it would be the honesty and like the reality of what you're putting on paper. Like, if I was to take that like test in the middle of a relationship, obviously my emotions would push me to rating certain things higher than others, right? So how do you gauge your or keep yourself honest in the how high you would rank?
Keeping yourself honest?
Or yeah, like how would you accurately scale it?
Yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right. I mean, that's a very honest confession there that we all would make. And that's the sense that some of us would rate ourselves too low, some of us would rate ourselves too high, and it might even just depend on the question that's there. So again, it is the idea that says, do I want to move into those second two, into the trust thing? Because again, that information, whatever you put down there, will be played out in your life. That's why that 90 days, why long-term relationships, you know, get into the sense that says, okay, I'm looking for patterns. You know, put something on an inventory or piece of paper, but if you're with that person, you're watching them or they're watching you, you're going to test this time. Does that answer what you're saying?
So like just being honest and watching patterns even throughout a period of time to see if they're being accurate or
Yeah, and it's interesting. I mean, we use a lot of online inventories with the counseling that we do. One of the things that's built into it is called a deceit factor. And that's the idea that tests can actually tell. I mean, that's why when some of those tests, they ask you the same question in different ways 2 or 3 times. They're looking to see what that looks like. But I think you're asking a hard question as much as you're asking an inventory question. And the heart is deceitful among all others. And so, I mean, it's the sense in which it's hard to know ourselves. That's why it's really important that other people are speaking to us.
Right. Presenting that to a mentor, you know, even telling, this is my guide, and this is where I think I am. Could you help pepper me with some questions so I could really test if this is really where? If I would say in our relationship, I needed somebody to speak into this because I thought I had read a commitment in him. And it was largely because he had kissed me. And I knew he had a rule that he wouldn't tell a woman he loved her until he was going to marry her. And I loved that rule. I loved that security that gave me. But because he kissed me, it was like, I'm confused. And so I needed to have somebody in my life that I could take this to and say, this is my grid, and I find myself at this juncture where I feel more committed to him than he is to me. Help me, you know, ferret that out. And that would be the kind of thing that a good mentor could do for you.
Hey guys, thank you for letting us share yesterday and today with you. Our goal in being here is this. From Hebrews 10:25. Might look a little different than you read it before. Maybe you read it, let us encourage one another to love and what? Good deeds. But if you look at the word hakma, and hakma is the idea of being a craftsman. It is the idea of doing good work. It is the idea that our desire for you is that we might encourage you to love for a lifetime with somebody in good works. We're going to be around.